been absolutely vital the last 2 or 3 years. The captive sector generically has been fairly flat, possibly even in decline, but the cell element has grown exponentially actually over the last 2 or 3 years. We've witnessed that here at Robus, but so has the wider elements of Guernsey. And I think that's just because captives have plateaued, if you like, in terms of their growth, and new captives are being formed, but undoubtedly the more dynamic area is the sell side, and so that has driven Guernsey's growth over the last few years. Well, I can only say our expertise is exceptional compared to other jurisdictions. We invented the PCC concept back in 1997, so we've got the longest experience of it. Most other domiciles have copied our legislation. Our lawyers understand it the best. Our regulators understand it the best. The managers understand it the best. So I think other domiciles undoubtedly do have cell experience or a variant of it, but I would say Guernsey is the focal point for most cell experience and expertise. Well, I was involved right back in 1997 when we first developed the PCC legislation. And at that time, the working group and all of those of us in industry really envisaged two elements to PCCs. At the time, there was a structure that people still use today, but it's more common then, renter captives. And we envisaged PCCs just being a variant of a renter captive where you had the segregation. And we also envisaged what we called incubator cells. This is where a mini captive, if you like, would turn into a big captive in due course, and someone would start off with a cell and move on to the bigger captive in their main standalone vehicle. So both of those things still do happen, but actually a much bigger part of the market are some of the developments that have happened since 1997. So one of the first ones that happened was people started forming PCCs for their own purposes. So a company would form the core and own all the cells. And why would you do that? All sorts of reasons. People put different business divisions in it. They may use cells for different currencies. They may use cells for different territories. They may use cells for different business streams. Secondly, people use PCCs for high net worth life insurance wrappers. So that's a completely different type of business, obviously, where individuals get involved and individuals are issued life policies by cells. And again, why would you do that? Well, because for those high net worth individuals, rather than have their assets invested in a mutual insurance company where they're being mixed up with everyone else's and are possibly at risk, they've got much more oversight and transparency over where their assets are and what they're doing, and they're ring-fenced from everybody else's, so that's attractive to them. Thirdly, composite insurers, which is where you have life insurance and general insurance in the same vehicle. Actually very difficult to do, in fact illegal in many countries for all sorts of reasons, mainly because life risk and general risk are so different. Whereas in a PCC structure, you can have a life cell and a general cell. The assets are ring-fenced and quite safe from each other, and that makes sense. And then finally, obviously, in the last few years, we've seen a huge growth in the insurance-linked security type transactions, and we never envisaged that in '97 because they didn't exist. And that's been a big development for PCCs and has driven a lot of the growth. Well, a lot of people think that an ICC is a variant of a PCC, and that's not really true. There is a fundamental difference, which is to say that a PCC is one legal entity, whereas an ICC is multiple legal entities. And the way we try and describe it the best is that a PCC is a little bit like the USA, which is to say it's one legal entity, it's one country with subdivided elements to it, so cells, or in the case of the US, states. Whereas an ICC is multiple legal entities, so that's countries, if you like, which are bound together by a common purpose and a common agreement. So that's sort of our way we describe it. Why do people use one over the other? Well, the primary reason is that within a PCC, cells cannot contract with each other because you cannot write a contract within one legal entity. Whereas within an ICC, incorporated cells can contract with each other. So if you want a structure where you want to move money around within that structure and move contracts around, move reinsurance around, an ICC is probably the way to go. Finally, there are counterparties who prefer to deal with a legal entity rather than a part of a legal entity. And so you do come across people who are uncomfortable with the PCC concept and contracting with a cell and would prefer to contract with an incorporated cell. Well, when we sit down with a prospective client, for example, for one of our PCCs, say Hexagon PCC, the first thing we talk to them about is what is the commercial consideration for setting up the cell. Because if it is a long-term program, then it may be that we need to consider all the variants of the captive model. So that would be a PCC or a ICC or a standalone captive. If it is a short-term transactional type structure, then a cell is absolutely ideal. But if they are foreseeing substantial growth or a substantial long-term investment, it is possible that actually they're better off not looking at a cell and going to a standalone despite the additional cost. We also try and encourage people to think longer term, as I say, because they may make a short-term saving in the cell, but if they have to unwind that cell and set up a new vehicle in a few years' time, it might have been better for them to set up the vehicle in the first place. There is a branding element to it. Some people need a brand or a name. Now, you can call a cell anything you want, but it will always have the name of the PCC attached to it. And that needs to be considered when considering whether, who is your customer and do they need to know your brand? Is your brand completely unimportant? And similarly, in terms of understanding the customer, it is that customer going to understand what a cell is? With a cell, you've got to explain it. There are plenty of people in the world who do understand what PCCs and cells are, but there are also plenty who have never heard of them. And are they going to be uncomfortable dealing with something that they don't really understand, or are they better to deal with a standalone vehicle? So all these are considerations. Cells are undoubtedly cheaper, more efficient to run, and so on, but that's not always the magic answer. Sometimes it's actually better to stand back and look at the wider picture. Well, undoubtedly growing. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Presumably we'll plateau out at some point, but we don't see that in 2015 or probably even 16. It is driving growth in Guernsey and indeed other domiciles around the world. Certainly for us here at Robus, it has been a massive catalyst to our business and a big driver of our business, not just on the ILS side, but also various reinsurance vehicles that we've set up, both under cell structures and incorporated cell structures. So I see all of that continuing in 2015, and I think from a Guernsey perspective, we'll see strong net growth in cells in 2015, and as Robus, we will just follow that, and I suspect we will see the same.